Welcome back or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Lacini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 50. My guest is Bill Parisi, founder and CEO of Parisi Speed School. Bill is an internationally recognized expert in youth speed training. Most of his life's work revolves around sports performance training, a topic he presents on to business owners, athletes, and coaches around the globe. Over the past 30 years, more than 1 million athletes have trained through the Parisi Training System in over 100 facilities and health clubs worldwide. Bill served as a consultant and featured lecturer for the NFL, USA Football, Nike, Reebok, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, National Academy of Sports Medicine, and more. He has also wrote for and spoke on almost every major news outlet, including ESPN, The Today Show, and the New York Times. He's on the forefront of researching and understanding fascia and the connective tissue and what it means for enhancing overall athletic performance. Bill is an author of several books, a trusted authority in the field of speed training, as well as a devoted businessman, husband, and father. And with all that said, let's get started. Bill, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I appreciate that intro.
You're welcome. And you and I have gone back several years now, and first introduced by a great teacher and mentor, Dr. Rob Gilbert. Do you mind just sharing a little bit of a story of how you met him and how influential he's been in your life?
Yeah, Dr. Gilbert has been a game changer, right? Every obstacle is an opportunity. I was in high school, undersized football player. Coach said go out for track. Went out for track, tried all the events, took a liking to the javelin, was pretty good at it. By my senior year, I was one of the top 10 throwers in the country, and I got invited to a meet called the Keebler International. So junior national meet, the junior nationals, 18 and under. Top two place finishers make the U.S. team. They go to Japan to compete. And then all I wanted was that USA sweatsuit. I was in second place up until the last throw of the meet. I thought I had it locked, and I get beat by 2 inches. I was devastated. I went into a state of depression. And someone said to me, "Hey, you gotta go to Dr. Gilbert's winner's workshop." I went to his workshop that summer, and it changed my life. It was just an experience, as you know. 7 hours with him, going through all his different strategies and listening to the stories. It set me on a course that I still continue today.
Doc Gilbert always says there's no great story without a great problem. And, you coming up 2 inches shy, just like you said, would you say, looking back on that was probably one of the best things that could have ever
Oh
happened to
yeah,
you?
no doubt. No doubt. Like that day after meeting Dr. Gilbert, that obstacle, that challenge became my biggest fascination, right? I was frustrated, but I turned frustration into fascination, and then just started this journey, this quest to learn everything about performance training I possibly could to become a better javelin thrower. It took me to Finland. It took me around the world. It got me to achieve a Division I All-American status for 2 years, going to the Olympic trials, and got me to compete on the same track as Carl Lewis and some other high-level athletes in my day.
Wow.
As a thrower. And all that experience I've continued to garner and put together to offer to fielding court sport athletes to improve their overall athleticism. Because throwing the javelin, really far, especially a 5'10" Italian from North Jersey, we're not supposed to throw the javelin far, right? We're supposed to, lay brick, make pizza, or give high interest loans for cash. I mean, that's what we do in North Jersey. That's people love that. I use that a lot. That one. But yeah, to be really elastic and you have to run down the runway as fast as you can with a 7-foot spear in your hand, and then stop on a dime. So you need speed, you need strength, you need flexibility, you need mobility. You need all these things throughout your whole body to kind of create a whip. and throwing is one of the most natural forms of athleticism. So training for that, training for speed, power, Olympic lifting, all these different things I did throughout my collegiate career, and then going on this quest, going to every strength and conditioning clinic when I was an undergraduate in college. I went to a clinic here in New Jersey actually in 1989, and it was hosted by the head strength coach of the New York Giants. I was a junior in college. I go, and he had this guy, Angel Spazov, in town, who was the head Bulgarian Olympic lifting coach. He brought him in to work with the Giants. And then to kind of make some money when he was here, they put out a clinic. They had a clinic. They said, Angel Spazov, learn the Bulgarian, Olympic lifting techniques and programming techniques. So I went, I'm 20-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year, going to strength and conditioning. And all these college strength coaches were there, and I'm there listening. So during lunch, I say, can I go to lunch with you guys? And it was Johnny Parker, head strength coach of the Giants, and Angel Spazov. And again, the Bulgarians won all the Olympic medals in the 80s. They were the best in Olympic lifting. They probably knew how to manipulate drugs better than anybody else back then, but they were the best. Mm-hmm. So I got to lunch with Johnny and Angel Spazov, and they started asking me questions. I just got back from Finland that summer. This was in the late summer, early summer. I just got back, and I learned all these different medicine ball drills, and that's when Johnny Parker, this is 89, Phil Simms won the Super Bowl MVP 2 years prior, first time the Giants won the Super Bowl. So I want you to come down to Giant Stadium and show Phil Simms all those medicine ball drills. And then Phil Simms became my first client training a Super Bowl MVP. I was a junior in college, and I'm showing Phil Simms, training him up on medicine ball throws. So that's how it started.
Absolutely amazing. There's the book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, and how seemingly throughout someone's life, before they become an outlier, they're given all these different opportunities along the way. And I'm tracking what you're saying, Bill, from the winner's workshop to the clinic, right? And what sticks out to me, though, is that you asked to go to lunch, right? You asked to have a meal with them. And I would say turning this over into why you did that, because many people bump into those opportunities, right? And it's just about taking that step to get through the door. What was it about you? Do you think that was something that you always had, right? That curiosity to go out to lunch, or do you think you learned that along the way?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but definitely it can be a learned skill. Your net worth is directly related to your network, right? So, always got to be networking. I did a talk on Perform Better. I speak on the Perform Better tour. And the founder, or the CEO of Perform Better, I did a talk on networking about 8-9 years ago. He said, and they have usually 30 speakers. He said it was the best talk in the history of Perform Better. My talk on networking, and I tell all these stories on how I got to the level I'm at now through networking, and through that exact story. That's one of the many stories that I encountered. So it's a learned skill. It can be a learned skill to. You don't ask, you don't get, right? And get comfortable being uncomfortable. So all things that you've heard before, but you got to put into practice. And, just breaking bread with people, getting to know people, letting them know, learning about them, right? Asking questions, listening, being an avid listener. And then when it's your time and they ask you questions, be prepared, have it rehearsed, kind of have some things about yourself that that are important that you're going to say that bring value to them, and that's really, to me, whenever I'm in a conversation, it's your EQ, right? It's your emotional intelligence. It's knowing how you can bring value to that other person is what you need to focus on. Like whatever your skill sets are, whatever network you have, whatever people I'm always processing, what can I do? Who do I know? What do I know about that can bring value to this other person and to their goals in life? And if you help enough people get what they want, somehow God works where he helps you get what you want. I don't know how it works, but it's kind of, you can call it just fate, you can call it, just destiny, whatever you want to call it. It does work out that way.
I'm really happy that you went there in terms of taking that like faith-based approach to it, because a lot of that is outside of your control. It's just about you controlling when it comes. Dr. Carol Dweck, her book Mindset, on the difference between fixed and growth mindset, is that many things along the way are a learned skill, but it comes down to your attitude, whether you want to use that skill or not, right? It's always a choice, day after day, moment to moment, moment to moment. And one of the things that I take away from your networking talk on the Perform Better tour is that confidence comes from competence. And you talked about your preparation and rehearsal before going out there, before adding value. And I think my favorite takeaway from your last response had a lot to do with adding value. I think the more you can enter a room or enter a place and look to add value, what can I give here? I heard someone say that the best definition of love is just to go in and make something better, whatever it is. If it's a relationship, you go to make it better. If it's a locker room speech, you go to make it better. If it's a presentation on Perform Better Tour, you go there with love and you look to make it better. One of the things that is amazing about your story is that before Bill Parisi had 1 million people walk through your health clubs, I saw this as I was getting prepared for this podcast. Quote, armed with only a $500 van and a motivational speech, I became one of the originators of the youth sports training industry in the United States. That must have been hard, Bill. Could you talk to me about the early days, how hard that must have been?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I decided to start the business, I'll give you another good story you'll appreciate. It's funny kind of going back. I haven't told these stories in a while, but so I'm at Iona College, right, competing, and I go to Iona because of the head coach was an Olympic level field events coach. Tony Niclario was the head coach there, but his focus was field events, and we had multiple All-Americans on our field events throws team. So I go there because of Tony Niclario, but I make All-American status for 2 years. But then I decide, I'm not done. I want to continue to compete. So the best thrower at the time was a guy by the name of Tom Puskas at the University of Florida. Tom went to 3 Olympic Games. He held the American record. Tom was a stud. He was, at the next level. He was at the world level. I was a high national level guy, ranked very low in the world at my peak. Tom was like top 5, right? So my senior year, so I competed against Tom in NCAA championships, met him. I said at the last championship in Duke University, we were competing 1990. I said, Tom, I want to come and move in with you, man. I want to come down to Florida, Gainesville, and move in. He goes, yeah, come on down. So I'm like, what am I going to do? So now it's the end of the year, my senior year at Iona. I cold call Steve Spurrier, who is the new head coach of the Florida Gators, just hired. I cold call Steve Spurrier and I say, Coach, and I leverage, Coach, this is Bill Parisi. I'm coming down to train with Tom Puskas. I'm trainer to Phil Simms. I would love the opportunity to be a GA for your team. I got some training techniques I think you would be interested in. He goes, how'd you get me on the phone? How'd you get me on the phone? I said, well, Coach, I told your secretary that, Phil Simms told me to give you a call, and which I told Phil I was calling him. He's like, yeah, call him. And so I leveraged that guy. He was laughing. He goes, he didn't care about what I was saying. He wanted to know how good Phil was playing golf. Like, how's his golf game? You know what I'm saying?
Oh my gosh.
So we chatted for just 30 seconds, a minute. He goes, well, I don't make those decisions. You got to call my head strength coach. All right. Thank you, Coach. I appreciate it. So he kind of closed the door on me, and I called the head strength coach. But when I called the head strength coach, how do you think I opened that call? I said, hey, Coach Kaufman. His name was Coach Kaufman. It's Bill Parisi, work with Phil Simms. Coach Spurrier told me to give you a call. Right? Right away, because he got hired by Spurrier, the head coach. So it was instant rapport. And he didn't have anything. I was looking for a GA, graduate assistantship, right? So he allowed me in the weight room. I was allowed to be in the weight room. He didn't have an official GA. for me, but I was in the weight room that first semester. Second semester, got a GA, took classes, and I was the official strength coach for the track team that year that had 3 Olympians on it. And I helped out with
Wow.
football. Yeah, I was in charge of track. I was like, all right, this is insane. I flew on their private jet to a couple of meets. Like they had their own plane back then. That was insane. This was 1990. I remember it was a small, probably a 30 or 40 seater. It had gators on the side. It was a really great experience. As a young athlete, 22. I was 22, 23 at the time. Some of these kids were my age. But I spent the year down there.
I'll tell you, Bill. I don't think there's anything cold call about that. I think you just defined a warm call, right? So and so told me to call you, and I think if there's a salesperson listening, maybe that's a tip there, the technique. So and so told me to call you, and there is that instant rapport that comes with that, right?
Yeah,
It builds all upon your networking idea.
yeah,
Kind of two things that really come away from that is most people would be hit with kind of an imposter syndrome or like, whoa, I don't know if I, deserve to be here. But it seems to me as I'm listening to you that you get over that pretty quickly. And there's an idea in psychology where in order to become a master, you have to first risk being a fool. And to me, it sounds like you were willing to risk being a fool. Why is that? How were you able to do that?
well, I think that's a great quote, and I think you always have to risk. There's always risk, and you got to have a lot of self-confidence. You got to really, you know, just believe in yourself. And I think, I just knew I had a foundation of just history and education. See, when you do it, when you put the work in and you do the study in, and you're really confident with what you do, and you have information that you really believe in, and it's backed by real science, non-negotiable science, and you're telling the truth. And I know right now there's a lot of things that are questionable in the training world or nutrition world, but there's some things that aren't questionable. So when you get a hold of those things that aren't questionable, that are real strong science, like fascia, which we're going to talk about, and speed training for me, which I knew I had a handle on back in the 90s, it gives you confidence to make those calls. And it gets even better because when I moved back to New Jersey after spending a year down there. I blew out my ankle, and it was an injury that just didn't work for me. But it was great experience with the GA and took classes. And now I come back and I do this clinic. I spend about $5,000, which is all the money I had right at the time. I just got done with college. I got 50 grand in student loans. I was just down in Florida. I was a GA. I wasn't really making any money. I was bartending. I drive back home. I want to start this speed training business. And I put together this flyer. This is 1992, 91, 92. And I have to mail stuff, right? So I mail 5,000 like flyers. I have to get them printed. I got to pay for postage. It cost me, like 3-4 grand. It was like almost 5 grand all in, between the printing, the postage. Now you just send an email, it costs you nothing, right? I spent 5 grand to mail 5,000 flyers, and they were color flyers. They were glossy. I put them in the mail. This speed, free speed clinic. I'm trying to get this thing going. I get one response. And the crazy thing is I had a pretty deep resume. I was a 2-time All-American. I was an Olympic trials qualifier. I trained Phil Simms. I was, Phil Simms' trainer. I was track coach, University of Florida, for 3 Olympians. All this on the resume to improve speed, and no one bought into it. Like, no one oh, you can't improve speed. So this was 1991, 91, 92. I did this, and it was an uphill battle. I remember I started cold calling coaches. I cold call Chuck Johnson, legendary high school football coach, 40 years. He's retired now, Ridgewood High School, one of the few high schools in New Jersey, in the country, public programs that is just, big, large high school. I remember they were the only public school that beat Bergen Catholic, a parochial power, Brian Cushing's senior year. So Brian Cushing, the all-pro linebacker, was a senior at Bergen Catholic. This public school beat Bergen Catholic, and Chuck was great. I called Chuck up. Hey, Chuck, my name is Bill Parisi. I want to introduce myself. Come down, give you some free education, do a free clinic for me. He hung up on me. Chuck Johnson hung up on me, just like not interested. Boom, hangs up. And because coaches didn't believe you can improve speed, they thought maybe I was a charlatan, what have you. They just weren't buying it. But then I ran a free clinic. I don't know, maybe about a dozen coaches showed up that were curious, blew it out, like just showed them right there, got kids faster right there, just with some basic techniques, showed them how, movement mechanics work and whatnot. They talked to other coaches. Eventually, Chuck Johnson brought both of his kids to our program. His own son and daughter came to our program. So that changed over the years. And then eventually we grew in North Jersey, but in the beginning, but now we know there's, speed training and performance coaches and speed training. I mean, it's a commodity. I mean, it's everywhere. But back then, it didn't exist. It didn't exist. Coaches didn't believe that it was even possible back in 1991. I can't believe it's 30 years ago. Like a lot of people on this call you weren't even born. And I'm getting hung up on by Coach Johnson.
Right. I mean, what sticks out to me, Bill, is I don't know how you persuaded them, right? I don't know how you finally got them to understand. I guess you had results, right, by the free
Yeah.
training
You can
and results.
kids move differently. Like just there, I
Got
know we do demos, learn by doing, and you can see kids just their movement efficiency, their force production into the ground, and just gap. It's like coordination, right? I mean, whether it be swinging a tennis racket, hitting a golf ball, with a professional instruction, you can see higher velocities in the swing within a few minutes. Same thing with foot strike into the ground. Same thing with decelerating, reaccelerating. You take kids that just never really learned anything before, and you start teaching them these movement mechanics and understanding ground reaction force and how force goes into the ground, how you get force to come off the ground. You start working on these things. You start understanding biotensegrity in the human body, how it's a spring system held together by connective tissue. You start adding these things together, and it makes a lot of sense. And you can leverage your free energy a lot more efficiently if you know what you're doing. In terms of ground reaction force.
So one last question, and then I want to dive deep into fascia. It's obvious to me that you've worked with down to 7-year-olds all the way up to Olympians. And a question I really wanted to ask you was, what do all the great ones have in common, right? From even the young kids all the way to the Olympians, what do they have in common that keeps them going, persisting, finding a way, improving their speed, becoming the best on their team or the league or the rank that they're in versus the one that just, decides this is not for me?
Yeah, and it's interesting. You're seeing this more and more, and this question is more easier answered now. And as soon as I say it, you're going to be, yeah, of course. It's committed to the entire process. When I say the entire process, sleep, nutrition, recovery, dialed into every aspect of your training and committed. Not just there's a lot of people that commit to training and they're in the weight room, they give it their all, but then they're out drinking, they're out having fun, they're not getting to sleep. But they're a dog, they come game day, they're dogs, they're dogs. They make plays, they can do that. But the great ones, man, yeah, they're making plays, but friends are out partying, they're home, they're dialed in, they're going to have their time to party. They know that. But it's all the attention to the details. It's all the other things off the field. A lot of more and more people are training and doing the things. And, when you look at Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, you look at these people that are just at completely different levels, right? I mean, just completely.
Mm-hmm.
I had to, I was on a call with Bobby Stroop, Patrick Mahomes' trainer, the other day, a couple hours talking fascia, talking training, and just, listening to what he does and talking a lot about what they do and like this evolution of athleticism, right? And what's happening at the core and the spine. Because I go pretty deep with the best in the world, right? Like that's kind of who I'm hanging with right now. Like Stuart McGill, who's by far the best biomechanist, best low back guy on the planet, bar none. He writes all the textbooks that with physical therapy students go to school. They get if they're lucky enough for their professors use his textbook, Low Back Disorders. So his philosophies with what other people are doing, and just kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. It's interesting. I know I've gone off track a little bit with your question, but to answer your question,
No,
yeah, it's about the details. And when you do the details, you can get athletes to respond like a Patrick Mahomes, in terms of how he can manipulate his body in space, unlike any other. Not many can do that. You know, how he can create this whipping action when he's in the air. That takes a unique training of the tissues, of the connective tissues, without injuring. So when I look at that, and I look at Stuart McGill's work, and I put these pieces of the puzzle together, because when you look deep at the spine, and you look at the discs, you look at the annulus fibrosus, the connective tissue that surrounds the nucleus pulposus, which is the jelly inside the disc, and you look at the science behind that, and how you want to really manage that in a certain way so you don't get a back injury, because that's the most common injury on the planet, right? The most common thing is that collagenous tissue, that annulus, that tissue around the disc, gets delaminated over time due to poor posture, bending with load, flexing with load over time, or dynamic twisting when the tissue is fatigued, or twisting under load. All these things kind of challenge that connective tissue. But now we know, there's ways to train that tissue to be more resilient, and also be able to perform in a way you need it to perform. But it's a very specific way of training, and you got to do a combination of a number of things. And we're unpacking this now. Like, we really are starting to unpack it, that allow. But it takes time. It takes years. Like, this is not something that you can start doing, in a couple of months. Like, muscle tissue responds in a couple of weeks. Connective tissue takes 18 months to get a response. And
wow.
Bobby's been training Patrick Mahomes since he was like 10. What's
Amazing.
interesting, all the things I've been doing, I didn't know what I was doing in terms of understanding the science, because we didn't have the science back then. Now we have the ultrasound equipment, only up in the last 10 years, to see connective tissue. You couldn't see it with X-ray or MRI. It was invisible. But now the ultrasound equipment is so powerful, you can see this connective tissue. And when you do medicine ball throwing, you're not really increasing muscle size or strength, maybe a little coordination. What you're really training is connective tissue. You're training your fascia to be more dynamic and lay that down. But I can go into that with questions, and I don't want to. I'm going to pause.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pause to you.
And I will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just first say, committed to the entire process, the detail side of things. Everything impacts everything else. I love that the next phase that we're going to go into is connective tissue. But before connective tissue, it's just about the connectivity of everything else. Everybody's training very hard these days. However, if you're up late at night arguing with your significant other, that's going to affect your sleep. If you're eating the wrong nutrition, that's going to put you in a bad mood, and everything bleeds into everything else. So I couldn't agree more with what you're saying there. And as through your story, speed training, free clinics, and things growing early 1990s, right? When did fascia really come into the forefront of your mind and being like, this is it. This is something that no one's talking about, that more people need to understand. This is the difference maker.
Yeah, right around 10 years ago for me, I started to look at it a little bit more closely. So right around 12, 13, but I didn't really dive in until like 15, 16. So it's a young journey for me. It's about 7, 8 years. And that's where the science really started to come on. The Fascia Research Congress was founded in 2006 of the top researchers. I actually, when I dove into it 7, 8 years ago, I have the privilege now to be on the board of directors of that society.
Amazing.
Yeah, and have great colleagues like Robert Schleip and Mark Driscoll and some of these great researchers, and be at these amazing conferences, which were every 3 years. It was in Berlin in 18, and we had to move it to 22, which was 4 years later because of COVID, in Montreal. But to hear from the greatest researchers in the world like the Stuckos and like I said, Robert Schleip and some of these other Jan Winke, who just came out with a meta-analysis about a year or two ago that talks about over 85% of all soft tissue injury is in the collagenous connective tissue. So a big breakdown is the collagen that holds muscle together. That's what's injured, whether it be the connective tissue within the muscle or the musculotendinous junction is where the injuries occur. So people aren't prepared from a connective tissue. For muscle-wise, to get stronger in the weight room, doing this, doing that, but you can get your muscles so strong where your connective tissue isn't strong enough, and that's 80% of the time is what's getting injured.
Right. And I was just talking this past weekend with one of the head physical therapists from the Stedman Clinic, Howard Head, Nate Neff, and he was just talking to me about the difference between capacity and load and everything. Can you sustain you have the capacity to sustain the load, right? And I think that's kind of what you're touching upon. For someone who's a listener that doesn't really know what fascia is all about, could you start rudimentary and before we go down into the deeper levels, what is fascia?
Well, first of all, I'm going to give you non-negotiable hard science, right? So my friend, colleague, Stuart McGill, he's definitely one of the most respected on the planet when it comes to low back and understanding low back disorders and just low back pain. He's published over 300 peer-reviewed research papers, numerous books. So him and I talk a lot about this and go into this. And so he talks about negotiable science and non-negotiable science. I learned this from Dr. McGill. Negotiable science is when you wake up one day and you kind of hear on the radio, eggs are no good. They have high in cholesterol. It's this, it's that. Then the next couple of years, eggs are good for you. Coffee's good. No, now coffee's not that good. Caffeine, all these different, until you get 100+ research studies and it's, to a point where, okay, this is non-negotiable. So what I'm going to share here today is non-negotiable, like science. So just to be clear, and if I'm going to say something that is negotiable, I'll let you know. There's not a lot of research on this yet. So what's non-negotiable is that fascia, number one, we know it's in our body. For the longest time, for 500 years, most anatomists and medical doctors thought it was just an innate system, meaning it was packing material, just held stuff in place. Like when you open an Amazon box, you get these bubble wraps and just didn't have much meaning. So just kept this stuff in the box so it didn't get damaged. Well, that's what people thought fascia was. Holds your organs in place, holds stuff in place, right? We know now fascia has up to 6 times more of the proprioceptors than muscle. So fascia is neurologically enriched. It's not negotiable. I mean, we know that. I mean, a lot of pain where people go to the doctors and say, oh, you got nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. Your back looks fine. The MRI looks fine. This looks fine. Most likely it's in the fascia. Fascia surrounds every cell in the body. So we know that if you take exercise physiology, it's called the endomyosin, right? So your cell is like a water balloon, right? Think about it. You have your nucleus, you have your mitochondria, you have all these elements in the cell. Well, what holds that cell together? It would be a muscle cell, a nerve cell, all these different cells. What holds it together is the fascia, the endomyosin. We know that, non-negotiable. Okay, you have that one cell. Now you have millions of cells together, which make up some of that organ or that tissue. What holds that together? So think of a water balloon with substance in it, hydrated with water as well. Then you have a bigger water balloon that has 1 million water balloons in that water balloon. Okay, that's called the perimyosin. That's another layer of fascia, right? It's called the perimyosin, non-negotiable. Then you have all those cells in a much bigger water balloon. So now you have this water balloon, one water balloon. Now you have 1 million water balloons and another water balloon. Now you have another 1 million water balloons and another water balloon, or maybe a couple 100,000. That makes up the epimyosin. That's the whole cell. That's the hamstring, or that's the whole muscle. That's the hamstring muscle, right? So that's wrapped in this big water balloon. Then you have these other water, and the material of fascia is kind of like cellophane wrapping or a water balloon. It's you see that when you eat, chicken on the bone, you'll see it's that, clear cellophane kind of greasy stuff. That's fascia. Then you have this fascia, this cellophane wrapping that wraps groups of muscles. So all the hamstring muscles, like the semimembranosus, semitendinosus, they're wrapped together. And then you have this huge layer of connect that wraps the entire body. So Tom Myers, who wrote Anatomy Trains, who kind of identified these different fascial lines, like superficial back line, superficial front line, spiral line, lateral line, these different lines of fascia that he's identified. They run throughout the body, and he talks about, we don't have 300 muscles in the body. We have one muscle in 300 individual pockets that operate in one system. And I've done about 7 or 8 fresh cadaver dissection, like in depth. I did a 40-hour full week, head to toe, full body fresh cadaver dissection, where we take the skin off and we go through the muscles. I mean, really in depth. And I've hosted these dissections. I've hosted a dissection with the NFL strength coaches. I've hosted them for medical fellows to study fascia. So this is, what I'm saying, you can't see fascia in an embalmed cadaver. Like, it's dried up and it dissipates. It's highly, it's a soluble water. It's fascia is made up of mainly water and collagen. But in an embalmed cadaver, you can't really identify it. That's why only in fresh cadavers. So we dissect, fresh cadavers. So there's a lot of science here, and we can see all this. And we now know that this material is 90% collagen and water, non-living. Like your hair is collagen. It's like non-living, like your external skin. Like it's collagen. Well, we have this throughout our body, this non-living system in our body that's highly innervated with neurology, and about 10% of it is cells, right? 10% of it. So it's this matrix that is, has these different viscosities. It has the ability to become a solid, and it has the ability to be a liquid. So it changes its viscosity and plasticity based on our lifestyle, based on our nutrition, based on our movements or lack of movements. It adapts to the environment. That's why you don't get a cast anymore when you get injured. They get you moving right away, because we have cells within the body called fibroblast cells that really trigger new collagen. So fibroblast cells are kind of like slugs or spiders, very similar to a spider casting a web. A fibroblast cell will cast a web of collagen, an innate protein that just shoots out this protein. We have video of this, by the way, in vivo, live in live human, that these fibroblast cells shoot collagen around muscle based on the stress you're putting on that muscle or the lack of stress. So if I'm sitting in a long car ride for 3 hours and my hip flexors are stiff, it's not just a neurological stimulation where we're hypertonic, where the nervous system is like spasmed. It's not just that. We know that for a fact. A big part of that stiffness is the fibroblast cells casting webs of collagen, locking down that muscle. That's why when you go in a cast and you can't move, because it's not neurological. A lot of that is because of the fascia built up from these spiders casting this collagenous tissue, locking down the joint. Like it's an internal cast under the skin. And when people have bad posture because they've been sitting at the desk for 30 years, doing accounting or whatever it may be, just people that work at a desk, their shoulders get rounded, they get locked into place because of this collagenous tissue being spooled by these cells that underneath the skin. That's why you got to get manual work. They got to break that up. That's collagen, and that's kind of that can be manipulated through pressure, through impact, through load. And so we know how to trigger now fibroblast cells to create collagen to work for us, not against us. So example, like great athletes that have dynamicism, they can move in different ways. It's a lot of that is because of the collagen matrix, not just the muscle, and understanding how to trigger what we call mechanical transduction. Mechanical transduction is when you put a mechanical signal into the body to trigger a response from these fibroblast cells to lay down new collagen. And that's what medicine ball training does. My colleague Robert Schleip did an ultrasound with highly advanced ultrasound equipment on Thomas Roller's right pec. Thomas Roller won the gold medal in the javelin in 2016 from England. And he identified a 3 millimeter aponeurosis, like a layer of connective tissue going across his right pec. 3 millimeters. That's something that you have on the bottom of your foot, your plantar fascia. That's thick fascia, right? And a lot of people get inflamed plantar fascia. Well, he identified this big thick plant, fascia aponeurosis, for lack of better words, across his right pec, 3 millimeter and 0.5 millimeter on his left. So he basically had like an Achilles tendon going around his right pec down to his core.
Wow.
But a much wider one, whatnot. I use the Achilles tendon because we know that's where all the recoil comes from, and your calf and all these things. It's free energy that was developed through throwing. That was mechanical transduction. That's free energy. So there are studies that we now know 30 to 50% of elastic recoil, jumping ability, sprinting ability comes from free energy of this tissue that is non-cellular. It's not really contracts. Like, it doesn't have a lot of contractile properties in it. It's free. It's like a rubber band. And we know now that, and there's research studies out that show, elastic recoil, muscle plays a role. It plays a role more isometrically than we thought when we jump, opposed to concentrically. And what's interesting, there are different types of jumpers. So if you're more of a muscle athlete, and these people, like there's athletes out there that are really lean and skinny, they don't have a lot of muscle, but they can fly, they can jump, and you kind of have to, they're all tendon, right? Then you have other athletes that are more muscular. So you have different drivers, right? Different athletic drivers.
Sure.
So muscle is a driver for one athlete, and fascia is a driver for the other athlete. And knowing what their anatomical homeostatic driver is, right? Is it the muscular system, the fascia system? Now, all systems are always in play, right? We have many systems in the body. You have your nervous system, cardio, muscular, fascia, connective, all these different systems. But different athletes have different, drivers that drive their athleticism. So, a muscular athlete or a connective tissue driven athlete, and you have to be careful on, how you train those athletes and how you address all the systems. But there's a lot coming out with the fascia system, and how we know we can train it, we know we can signal it in a way, and we've been doing it, with med ball training, and when you do different types of training, like when you throw, to be a good thrower, lifting is good for just injury resilience and getting the joints to increase joint integrity. Just swinging a lacrosse, stick, right? Just that technique, and that's not just muscular, that's fascia driven. That action of that initiation, you got to create stiffness, you got to brace, and then you got to fire. And when you fire, you're firing initially, but as you go through and you're bringing that stick through, there's an element of relaxation. Like, you're not like driving it hard. It's like you're a boxer. You're not. I would rather get punched by a guy that can bench press 800 pounds than Bruce Lee.
Right.
Who would you rather get punched in the chest by?
Right.
A guy that can bench press 800 pounds or Bruce Lee? Bruce Lee will kill you if he punched you as hard as he can in the chest. Literally, and I don't think he can bench press more than 250, right? So the muscle driver, and then there's that fascia driver, and we know, and Bruce Lee obviously he's passed now, but people that create high levels of force, It's not just the muscular system, it's the nervous system. It's knowing how to isometrically contract and knowing how to relax, quickly. There's a lot of research I can talk about in terms of whether it be the golf swing or roundhouse kick by the top MMA fighters in the world that Stu McGill has done research on. So that athleticism, that piece of athleticism, whether it be a lacrosse swing, a punch, a throw, a foot strike into the ground, to sprint, those movements of high speeds that create athleticism, I've done a real deep dive in, and I understand at a real deep level now how to get that.
Well, I really appreciate you going into the non-negotiable, the hard science of it, because what I could say is I sat down with Boyd Epley, the first strength and conditioning coach in America at Nebraska, and what he was looking to jab at is the misconception that a stronger athlete is bad, right? And if there's stories of people running along the Charles River and police stopping them, like, why are you working out, right? So there's like strength and conditioning has come a long way, and then now what I'm kind of taking away from what you're sharing is that sometimes working on just strength building and strength building and strength building, right? There's to what end, right? And understanding the nuance is a really important idea. I have a great team at Thorne Health Tech that supports me supplementally, and they're really pushing collagen my way, right? They're saying things like, you try this out. It's very pure. It's going to help you with your longevity, and you're just pushing hard science to back that, and we're all the way down to the fibroblast cells and understanding that we create these proteins all the time. And I think people understand this if they're on a plane for too long or on a long car ride. That's where you really start to viscerally feel it. Like you said, learn by doing earlier on in this podcast. You actually learn just by experiencing, the stiffness you feel getting out of a long car ride. I want to ask you, because you touched on it a little bit with the med ball. How do you train it? How do you take care of it, Bill? What are some takeaways that now that people know what fascia is all about, what can they do about it? What should they be doing about it?
So first, it's understanding, I call it movement hygiene, right? So you really got to master your movement hygiene, your sitting hygiene, everything you do. So here's an example. When most people sit, they externally rotate their legs. They'll cross their feet, so their femur is going to be externally rotated out to the side with one leg or the other. Very common, right? When you sit, your feet are usually turned out in some way, shape, or form. But we sit a lot. So think about this. If you're sitting and your femur is externally rotated, those fibroblast cells are slowly locking down that femur to be slightly externally rotated to a point where you can't notice it. But now you're running and you're doing all these things like in practice, and you have a slight external rotation, which you can't even pick up with the naked eye. But there's a slight little misalignment that compounds over time. And your movement and sitting hygiene, if you're in positions for long periods of time, you're going to have collagen buildup to want to lock that joint down in that position. The body's a very smart organism, and it's always trying to protect itself. So if you're the body starts working to save that position, to maintain that position right away. So you have to be aware of this, how you sit, how you walk, how you stand, everything. And then you have to move omnidirectionally in training with submaximal loads. So like med ball is a submaximal load. So when you take away degrees of freedom, so in training, you can increase load and you can you increase degrees of freedom, like the range of motion you can have in omnidirectionals, right? So degrees of freedom and intensity are inversely related. So what do I mean? So when I squat, I can squat a heavy weight, but my degrees of freedom are very limited, meaning I'm only moving at the ankle, knee, and hip joint, and they're moving in one plane of motion, the sagittal plane. If I got other movement going on, I'm going to get hurt. So that's a very limited degrees of freedom, and it's a very high intensity. I think we've overplayed that in this country in a big way. I think strength training is important. It's a foundation. There's no doubt about that. You got to be strong, but how strong is strong enough? I believe you can limit your athleticism by getting too strong. Now, if you're a power lifter and that's your sport, yeah, get strong. But if you squat 2 times your body weight, and you want to be an explosive field or court sport athlete, in my book, you're good. Let's maintain that. Let's develop the fascia system. And I think if you're living in that sagittal plane with limited degrees of freedom and heavy load, you're developing collagen to be really strong in that plane of motion. And when you get out of that plane of motion, because we know sports is multiplanar, it's frontal plane, it's transverse plane, I believe you have a higher risk of injury. Now, that's not hard science. This is my belief. So when I look at training and I look at degrees of freedom, when you train fascia, you increase the degrees of freedom and you lower the load. Medicine ball training is an example. So you have many degrees of freedom. You're on multiple planes of movement, and you're doing it in a way with a submaximal load. That's fascia training. Submaximal load, omnidirectional. And there are different tools out there like the Viper, my colleague, Michelle Delcourt. Great story about Michelle and the Viper. Michelle's a Canadian hockey strength coach for Canadian hockey players 20 years ago. And he's getting his guys strong, traditional squat, bench, getting them stronger. Goes to the hockey coach. Hey, how are my guys doing? They got to get stronger around the puck. All right. Goes back to the weight room. Bigger bench press, bigger deadlift, bigger squat, front squat, getting them really strong. Goes back the next year. How are my guys doing? Got to get them stronger around the puck. Who's beating my guys? The farm kids. So if you're in a wrestling competition and you're a betting person and you had two athletes, both the same body weight, 185, same training aptitude, same technical skill, exactly. But one grew up in the city lifting weights and one grew up on the farm doing chores. Who are you going to bet to win that match? Farm kid. Why? Because his whole life, he did omnidirectional loading, lifting with some maximal loads. He baled hay, he dug ditches. He trained his fascia system. When a bench press athlete goes up to do a bench press competition, he puts a bench press shirt. Takes 3 guys to put that shirt on because it's a super tight shirt. And he comes up to the bench press and he has his arms apart and his arms are like stuck. Because when he comes down, he gets free energy from that bench press. That's fascia. That's what creates underneath the skin, you omnidirectional load the system with some maximal loads, omnidirectional submaximal loads. So we know this now. We know we can trigger these fibroblast cells to lay down this collagen, this bench press shirt around all of our muscles, around our joints. We use aqua bags. We use all these training devices, Vipers. We use these training devices to trigger the spooling of collagen. So this is different from muscle building, and this takes 18 months to see a response. And that's why you get freaks like Patrick Mahomes that can do things no one else can do because his trainer Bobby Stoops gets it.
I'll tell you, this is why it's so important to not take too long away from a movement hygiene, because 18 months is a big deal, right? So every time you are not doing it, you're taking further and further away to gaining that traction. When it comes to physical therapy, it's always been told to me, and maybe this is in line with your thinking, mobility then stability. And you expressed it from the gait and how you sit. It's something that I've noticed, how I sit. I didn't even know I had a glute min until recently, right, where I have to start working on these little tiny parts of my body that haven't always been worked in the squat and the deadlift and these massive movements. Now I'm doing a lot more omnidirectional axe chops and things that are in different planes, and that's really helping me taking on vinyasa yoga and putting the body in different situations where it has to handle perhaps that omnidirectional movement like you're talking about.
But just don't.
Bill, I know I only have a couple minutes.
Just don't stay in those yoga positions too long of a time, because it could limit your recoil effect, right? And that's a whole nother conversation on fascia's plasticity, right? So it responds in different ways. So I mean, that's another conversation, but yeah.
Right. I'll tell you, Bill, I know that, I have way more than 10 questions to ask you, but I only got a couple minutes with you. So I'm thinking about, what question should I ask him to kind of wrap it up? And I wanted to ask you about how you took Parisi to the level that it did in terms of expansion. I wanted to ask you about the Parisi Prep Academy, but I think this is people are going to have to reach out and learn more through you and you get connected that way. I guess I would just ask you this, given your journey, right, which started before the 1990s and you've been going after it. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were first starting out?
That's a great question. I think, I really started to accelerate. I guess the career always learns. I mean, now I wish I knew I was focused more on early on in my career, knowing how to just manage employees better. Like I'm now I do that
Mm,
well, and we have a whole network, but being really slow to hire, quick to fire. I've always been someone that give them a second chance, give them a third chance, give them a fourth, just we can turn them, we can turn them, we can get them, to get them on board and be that strong contributor to the team. And nowadays, it's like, okay, we're going to interview a lot better. And we can see it. We can see patterns in the resume. We can see patterns in how many jobs someone has had. Not that that's a bad thing, but that is a pattern. So looking at these
sure,
patterns of people and seeing, their commitment to their craft, like we want to be involved with people that are really committed to their craft, and we constantly are elevating our association, our network, our affiliation to wear our brand and to do what we do. And we're constantly, raising it. So I wish I was more like that in the beginning, and I would have probably saved a lot of different headaches. And getting people moved along to maybe a career they didn't think it was for them, or they get burnt out quickly, because doing what we do, coaching is hard work. It's fun, it's exciting,
sure,
but to be a great coach, man, you got to be on. You got to be on, and sometimes people
sure,
they get burnt out, and knowing when someone's burnt out, having a hard conversation with them, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and saying, hey, are you into this anymore? And getting them to kind of come to the realization, time to move on. So yeah, I think that, and when you're young and you're a new business owner and you're doing things, everything's
sure,
great, you're trying to keep everybody happy, and listen, honesty is not always positive.
sure, sure. And I will say, Bill, like right from the beginning, I was taken away, wow, Bill is outstanding on the communication front. He's asking questions, he's asking go to lunch and all these things. And our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. Being able to communicate, is something that you've evolved over the years. I love how you brought up patterns there. One of the books that I would push people towards is your book, Success Patterns, right? The Bill Parisi story. They can check that out. Last question, and then I'll let you go. If people want to learn more, or where can listeners go to learn more about Bill Parisi?
Yeah, we have a lot. ParisiSchool.com. We have a mentorship we run twice a year. It's phenomenal. I'm on it. I give tons of information about everything we're doing, about business, about fascia, about training, about speed development, about starting your own business. So that's something that's coming up here. We only run it twice a year. It's I think it's an 8-week program. We got a guy that runs it, but then I'm on it 4 or 5 times. And then we have the Fascia Training Academy, which is another program that has a lot of education. But our mentorship is something that's, that really people can learn a lot from. And then ParisiSchool.com and FasciaTrainingAcademy.com is where you can find a lot of great stuff.
Awesome, Bill. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so great to admire you from afar. I now call you a friend, and I look forward to the future.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, man. It was a lot of fun.